Do something a little bit different. I'm broadcasting right now from Jerusalem, um, in Israel. It's literally in the middle of a war zone, and there's been thousands of rockets shot towards Israel over the last like 10 days, and just been crazy. And just seeing a lot of the stuff that's going on in the news and people reaching out and asking me questions and things like that, I thought it was important to kind of start a conversation on how to analyze what's going on, here in the Middle East, and how to understand how, things are being presented in the news, why they're being presented this way. But I want to give it from an African American experience. I want to talk about how to see what's going on as a black person, as a person of color, how to understand what's going on, and how to filter the right information. So let's start like this. The goal here is to understand terrorism, right? And to understand why it exists and what's going on. And I want to make it real. And so I want to talk about real life experiences. I'm not going to talk about, historical dates and this happened here and this happened. Let's talk about real experiences. So I came to Israel in 2016. And when I came to Israel, it was just very new environment, coming from Los Angeles, coming from, the entertainment space, a very, very new environment. And I live in a place called East Jerusalem, right? In East Jerusalem, half of it is all Jewish, other half is all Palestinian. And it's like literally a street that divides both worlds. And they're two completely different worlds. And so it goes like this. So one of the most shocking experiences that really opened me up to understanding, Islamic radicalism, to understand terrorism, to understand the mechanism here. It was I think it was like 2018. There was a man by the name of Aziz Abu Sarah. And who is he? He's a Palestinian man. He was a businessman here. He lived over in East Jerusalem, and he ran for mayor, right? He ran for mayor, and it was like a huge thing because it was the first time that, Muslim Palestinian was running for mayor, because the Hamas, the terrorist organization, they, are they forbid people to participate. And not only did participate like in elections, running for office, even though there is a Knesset and there are, Knesset members, but in terms of running for things like city council, there was the year, I think 2018, there wasn't just Mr. Sarah, it was also 10 other Palestinians that were also running for city council seats. He was running for mayor, but there's 10 other Arabs that were running for city council seats. And as we know in America, there's a lot of focus around, African Americans being politically active, and African Americans wanting, certain elected officials that have their interests. Ice Cube put together, this platform that was an African American platform for how to improve utilizing politics and taxpayer dollars to improve the Black community. Right? This was Ice Cube. He came out with this. And so there's an understanding that being politically engaged changes your environment. If you're not politically engaged, then you're out of the conversation, right? Like no one, your voice isn't heard, right? So these group of Palestinians wanted to run for office here in Israel, in Jerusalem, and it was 11 of them, right? It was 10 people running for city council, and then there was Mr. Sarah, who I'm talking about. In the middle of the election, when he was running for office, he had to drop out along with the other 10 people because they received so many threats by Hamas, right? By terrorist organizations. They told them, if you would continue running for office, this Palestinian, if you continue to run for office, that we're going to murder and kill you. It was a big story. It was a big story here in Israel. And I knew actually a reporter was actually covering the story. It was this girl that I met, whatever. And so the point is to say that when you look at what's going on here in Israel, in Jerusalem, and you're hearing in the news about these inequities that exist in society, is because the Muslims, the Palestinians, are not allowed to be politically active outside of whatever Hamas allows them to do. You know what I'm saying? Like whatever them or the PLO, whatever these organizations, whatever they allow them to do is what they're able to do. Anything outside of that, they cannot do. They cannot form their own private interest groups. They can't form their own coalitions. Everything is under that, and they don't. It's not that they talk about people get canceled, right? Cancel culture. Here, you will get killed. They will literally kill you for going outside of their whole thing. So when you see the inequities that exist here in specifically Jerusalem, because there's a lot of issues with the, Sheikh Jahar community, Simona Sadiq community, that'll it's a lack of political engagement. There's issues here with sanitation for the Arabs. There's issues here with schooling. There's issues here with being allowed to build. They have issues with certain things with demolition, different things. There's issues that they have. The same thing in America. Black people have issues with the government, right? They feel that there's certain inequities. Money is not being spent appropriately. So that exists here and it exists in America. Now, the issue is over here is that when people want to make changes, they're not able to make changes, right? They're not able to be a part. They're not able to participate. They're not able to participate in government because there's other organizations that will murder them if they do that, right? So that's over here. So there was a guy who ran for office, a Muslim guy in 2018. I watched the whole thing. I was here, and literally I saw clippings of radicals coming to his campaign press conferences and shouting him down and threatening his life and his whole family. And so he eventually, along with 10 other Arabs, dropped out of running for office, city council, and along with the mayor. That's over there. Another issue is so I grew up in Southern California, right? I grew up in LA, and I grew up in what they call the San Fernando Valley, the West Valley of that. And the bottom line is there's a tremendous amount of Persians that exist, people from Iran that live in Los Angeles, in the city, whatever, both Muslim and Jewish. And the thing about it is that both of these groups, Jews and Muslims that live in Iran, first of all, both are beautiful people. I have tons of friends, done business with so many of these people. When I converted to Judaism, the community that embraced me when I was going through my conversion was the Persian community, Netzach. Obviously I have my Rabbi Hafuta, who's Moroccan, but the Persian synagogue in Los Angeles completely embraced me. I was a part of all the organizations after I converted, but even before I converted, people were warm. They invited me to their homes. I just developed a tremendous relationship. Rabbi Shofet, who's the head rabbi there, and I think Rabbi Zakai is there now. Anyways, so the point is that so I have a great relation with the Persian community. Why are the Persians in Los Angeles? Why are they in Los Angeles? What's going on? The reasons why the Persians are in Los Angeles, people from Iranians from Los Angeles, both Jewish and Muslim, is because they had to flee the country in 1979 because Islamic radicalism took over, okay? It took over. They felt there's different factions of ideologies throughout the Middle East that felt that they were losing control of their environments, their community, their resources to Western ideologies, the ideas of freedom, the ideas of religious freedoms, the idea of a free market economic system, democracy, all these different things. They felt like they were leaving. They felt like they were losing this power. And so what they did was they created these small factions, different names all throughout the Middle East and even Africa. They created these different factions, and they took the teachings, different ideas that exist inside of the Quran and ideas that exist inside of the Hadith. And they took those ideas and then they morphed them into these kind of like radical ideas that basically said, if you go against the way we believe this religion, you are subject to death. You are a kuffar. You could die, and that's the mechanism. Like, you will die if you go against this idea. So the Muslims and the Jews that exist in America right now fled Islamic radicalism. Right now, the next idea. These are people that I knew. I'm hearing their stories. Muslims who had to take all their stuff, all their belongings, and find different ways to get out. To find ways to get out of Iran. Jews that had to find, because we usually hear about Jews leaving countries, right? Jews being expelled from different places and things like this. In this situation, we're literally talking about Muslims and Jews both walking across the desert with suitcases of whatever belongings they could take to get out of there to save their lives, right? This is a real story. So now you see people in America, how do they get there? If they're from a Muslim country, the high majority of the Muslims that exist in America are people who fled Islamic radicalism, and they were seeking opportunities of peace. They were seeking opportunities of freedom. They were seeking opportunities, economic opportunities. And so that's one idea. But this is, I think, is the most important idea. The most important idea. So in 2000, like around like 2013, 2000, 2013, 2000, 2014, 2012, around that time, I took a job with this organization called the American Refugee Committee. So who's the American Refugee Committee? I guess it speaks for itself, right? But the idea behind it, the reason why they hired me is because I was working in the entertainment space. And in the entertainment space, I was developing all these like very innovative ways where I was like organizing creative communities at a grassroots level and building brands and then leveraging those brands onto online properties. And then through those online properties, they were doing these tremendous analytics, like, hundreds of millions of views and different artists or whatever. And so I was taking those communities and the individuals in those communities, and I was creating partnerships with, like Warner Brothers and Sprite and Electives, partnered with executive producers like Ben Silverman, the CEO, Warner Brothers, Todd Moskowitz was my partner. You know what I mean? So these are real things that I was doing. And out of that came the New Boys and Todd Dollar Sign and DJ Mustard and who else? The whole Kendrick Lamar, all these different people came out of this whole movement out of the West Coast. So these people were seeing this, and I was always in the media because I did the film, the television, the music deals, all this around this. So people read about me, and so they contacted me and asked me, could I create creative programs for them? They had this I'm a Star campaign, and this I'm a Star campaign was actually with Kanan, who's a relatively very famous Somali rapper who lives in Canada. And so basically the I'm a Star campaign was about the I'm a Star campaign was about the issue in Somalia, right? So Somalia is another example, just like Iran. I know kids. I met a lot of friends from Somalia, a lot of people in Toronto, and they were telling me before like in the 1980s, before the 1980s, they were listening to the Beatles. People were going to the beach. Women were not required to wear hijab. They weren't required to do these different things. They weren't. They didn't have to do that. They were living very Western lives. And again, the same type of ideology. People felt like they were losing control of their culture. They were losing control of their environments. And then so from there, what did they do? They created this radical idea, and there's a whole story about it. I'm not trying to go into that. In Egypt and the Muslim Brotherhood and this, and going to Saudi Arabia and all this type of stuff. You can see the whole thing. It's all online. But I'm talking about real experiences, real people that I know, real people that fled Islamic radicalism. But this is the thing: when I worked for the American Refugee Committee, there was an issue because there was a whole issue because the American Refugee issue, the American Refugee Committee was dealing with refugee issues. Okay, that's what they were doing. So when they hired me, I was there to just develop different campaigns, create partnerships with people, and basically give them like this very robust way of dealing with some of the infrastructure challenges that they had, right? And so one of the campaigns we did was I'm a Star campaign. You can probably look it up. And the point of this campaign was to raise money and awareness about the Somalian refugees that were leaving Somaliland and traveling to an area called Dadaab, Kenya. Dadaab, Kenya is the largest refugee camp in the entire world. Okay. And so the idea was that what happened was that these people were fleeing Islamic radicalism in Somalia, and they were walking across this desert. And if you drove it, a day and a half, almost 2 days, right? But if you walked, it was like, I think they said it's like almost 350 hours of a walk, depending on what the GPS you're looking at. But it was, so people were dying on the way to get to Dadaab, Kenya, right? So the programs that I was working on, that we were raising money and developing campaigns to build hospitals in between. So like it's like so it took like 300 in almost 350 hours to walk there. So like in between that, cut that in half, we were building hospitals, and we successfully built hospitals on all throughout the site there under the under the permission of the U.S. State Department and these types of things. So I had to deal with the U.S. State Department. I had to deal with the United Nations. I even had to travel to Geneva to deal with certain issues, these types of things. And so the point is just saying that we build hospitals to go there. Now, that's recent. This is like 2013. But from the mid 1980s to the early 1990s, almost close to 50,000 Somalians left and went to Canada. That's not counting Somalians who went to the UK, Somalians that came to America, because in Minnesota, where certain Congress people are elected, they're Somalian. That's their voting base. It's those Somalians that were refugees, right? And they're the same people now that are supporting Hamas, right? Like, you got to think about it. These people escaped Islamic radicalism, came to the West, and then now they're the ones supporting Islamic radicalism by defending Hamas. So this is one of the big things. I think this is a huge concept. Before I worked for the American Refugee Committee, I worked in like the entertainment media space, right? So I dealt with marketing, advertisement, promotion, all these different types of things. And it was all like consumer related, right? So we would run stories in the news. We would, run ads, things on social media, things on television, things on cable TV, billboards, posters, flyers, all this type of stuff to communicate things, right? So when I worked for the American Refugee Committee, it was the first time that I was dealing with the same exact type of ideas, but from the context of social concepts, meaning that like we wanted to bring awareness around what was going on in Dadaab, Kenya, right, with this large refugee committee. So what we did was we would pitch news organizations like CNN and I mean everybody from CNN to Fox News to Al Jazeera to BBC to all this area. We're going in there and giving pitch meetings on these stories. And then we would even try to even bring in certain partners. Maybe it was an advertiser who would run certain ads. And they was like, okay, we're running your story. You guys are bringing in this type of money. It was the same exact type of model that exists in the entertainment business. But the difference is you're talking about social ideas. And two, you're talking about straight news. So when you're watching the news, you're not watching, like you hear Donald Trump and people saying fake news, fake news, fake news. You're not watching the news from the standpoint of the freedom of the press, free journalism, and they're giving you this truth that's going on. No, you're hearing constructed ideas that are coming from organizations, NGOs that are in there pitching these news organizations and even giving them money to run certain stories. So now, if you hear a story in the United States, for example, these are about what's going on in Israel. It's either someone influenced by something coming from the Israeli side or something from the Palestinian side. However, the issue is like this. I said this in the other video. This information I'm getting directly from Palestinians that live here in Israel, and it just makes total sense. They told me that every time Hamas goes broke, every time they lose money, what happens? They start firing rockets at Israel. So why does Hamas put bombs in front of hotels, and not hotels, in front of schools, in the middle of residencies, on apartments that are surrounded by nurseries and preschools and all these different things? Why does Hamas do that? Okay, they're going to war with Israel, but why are they using people as shields? Like, what's the concept behind it? Because the concept is like this. The concept is I shoot rockets, hunt thousands. You respond back. I get to go to the United Nations and to all these other organizations that are very biased, against Western democracy in a lot of ways. And what they do is they go out and they raise billions of dollars for reconstruction and for aid and all these different things. This does not go to the Palestinian people. Okay, this does not go to them. Hamas is a $3 billion organization, and this is just one organization. You got Hezbollah. You got I mean, you just have tons of things. Again, this is not a history lesson. Do your own research. But the point is saying that these terrorist organizations are pocketing this money and they're putting it in their pockets, and that's why Gaza looks the way that it does. If they took build schools, provide education, teach the kids coding, create social media partners to be able to produce and put content out in the world, innovations. The same thing Israel is doing, right? Israel is training its youth to be innovators with technology. And that's why so many innovations and inventions of social progression through social technologies are being created here is because of that. That's not what Hamas is doing. Hamas is literally training these kids to be soldiers. Why? Because they're just there for revenue. The whole community is there for revenue. That's it. They don't care about these people. That's why they will put rockets right in front of an elderly home, because they want Israel to come down. Now, what Israel does to prevent casualties, they're buying certain weapons that are very concise. They hit certain places that reduce civilian casualties. And then also, they even warn people. I mean, there's videos online, them showing the idea of calling older people saying, hey, don't go into that building. We're going to be bombing there in a few hours. Don't go in there. Everyone's out of there, calling people, leaving leaflets, everything. So the people leave. Right now, people that were in northern Gaza, fled to the southern part of Gaza. You know what I mean? So the point, and for them, for the terrorists, it's just business. Even in Iran, when you hear about them, they used to have they used to always make these threats against Israel. And every time they make threats against Israel, the price of oil will go up, right? Because everyone's like, oh, there's going to be a war. We got to get as much oil now, store up reserves, this whole thing. So all this stuff is it's a business model. This is a business model. And African Americans can relate to this. And that's why it's important to see it through the African American lens, because there's a concept called the prison industrial complex, right? Something that was designed to lock up empowered people in themselves. So what happens? Mechanism where you could justify locking up. How do you create a mechanism where you could justify locking up thousands and hundreds of thousands of young African Americans and Hispanics? How do you justify it? Gangster rap, right? You put images, you take the worst, you take rap music, which is the popular music, and you turn that and you weaponize it, and you show people with guns, or you show people killing each other, and you create movies about the gangster life, and then you create TV shows about the gangster life. In that white American, right? Because you don't even realize Black people only make up 13% of the population. That white American is terrified. He's terrified. She's terrified. Get my daughter away from that. We can't go in that neighborhood. They just murder people. How? Because I'm looking at it on the news. I'm looking at it on entertainment. I'm looking at it on TV shows. I'm listening to it in music. So gangster rap was a mechanism that allowed suburban America to justify the incarceration of African American and Latino youth, because they were put into a state of fear. And this is exactly what's going on now with the news in America. You're hearing these stories, but these stories are not about the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people, they just like us in America. They want to go to work every day. They want to make money. They want to, have a dinner. They want to see their kids go and prosper. The Israeli Palestinians are some of the most educated people in Israeli societies, the one who are in the college system, the one who have acclimated into the Israeli system. And you go to a hospital here in Israel, mostly all Arab Muslim doctors, everywhere you look, So the point that I'm saying is that the same propaganda that was used to justify the incarceration of African Americans through the news, right? Gang shootings, TV shows, movies, music, the whole thing. That's all you see. The Black American is a gangster, right? And you know what? The brainwashing was so intense, there's Black people who believed it. And so the same thing exists right now, what you're seeing with this narrative about Israel. Israel is fighting against an old idea in the Middle East. That's what Israel is doing. It's fighting against an old idea, and it's outside of the support of the United States and a few other partners. It's all by itself. But the way that the media is portraying it is that Israel's the aggressor and is trying to hold down the Palestinian people. Do you know how many nonprofits exist here in Israel that have to do with Palestinian and Israeli integration, partnership, inclusion, business relations, creative relations? You know how many Palestinians and Jews live in peace in Tel Aviv, that live in peace in Haifa, all these different types of places. Yeah, now you may see riots, you may see things, but this is also part of the propaganda. Anyways, so in closing, we have to take a new perspective to, as they say, peep game, right? You have to be able to really look at what's going on and really critically analyze it. Now, the new thing is to use Black people for this business model that's happening over here. The whole point. So how do you get Black people involved? You come to them and say, hey, look, there's this white oppressor. Most of Israel is people that look like me, dark complected people. Okay, most of Israel is the minority here. In many cases, are people that will be considered Ashkenazi. Most of Israel is dark people, right? But the way the media portrays it is like these white people here, the same white people who did this to you in the South, did this to you in America. That same ideology of white supremacy is here in Israel too. Now, that's not to say Israel doesn't have its flaws. It's a government. Governments are full of flaws, period. The Israeli people want peace like everyone else, right? The Palestinians want peace like everyone else. Now, are there factions of Palestinians that don't want peace? 100%. Are there factions even of some Israelis that don't want peace? 100%. But the high majority of the people here want peace amongst each other, right? And especially the Jewish religious community definitely wants peace with everybody, because that's the whole purpose of the Torah. So in closing, this is just part one, and I just feel like it's important to share this perspective of really looking at what's going on. Look at your friends that live in your cities. Look at them. If they're from a Muslim country, why did they come here? What were they running from? They weren't running from America, because they wouldn't have came here. They weren't running from Israel, because they wouldn't have came here. So what's going on? What's happening? You got to ask yourself that. And then why is the media making me focus on a particular idea? Can I, all of a sudden now I trust the media? All of a sudden now I trust the media. The media has been brainwashing white Americans against African American society for how long? And so now all of a sudden I'm going to trust the media? That's kind of crazy, right? So anyways, do your research, talk to people, have conversations, but literally, if you're supporting Hamas, you're spitting on the Palestinian people, and you're spitting on democracy here in the Middle East, and you're spitting on all the Israelis that want to have peace with all people. You're spitting on them because you are believing a narrative that just does not exist. And my blessing to everyone looking at this is that God empowers us to have the strength to see things as they really are, and to be able to fight against the perceptions and to fight against the ideas that people are trying to inject into our heads, not just here in Israel, but all around the world. People want peace. There's factions of people who want power that are manipulating all of us to fight against each other. And they're making trillions of dollars, not billions, trillions of dollars. And they're making us fight against each other and hate each other. Hamas is a perfect example of that. And we're going to go deeper into the whole Hamas thing. Right now, this wasn't the video for that, but this is just to kind of give a broad look. But these are real experiences. Look at, the guy who's running for mayor here. That's real. Do research. Aziz Abu Sarah, do research on how he was threatened, and all these other Arabs here were threatened not to participate in politics. Do your own research. Second part, look at the Iranians that came here in 1979. Why? Why did Muslims and Jews leave Iran? Think about it. Think about it. They were running from Islamic radicalism. Hamas is connected to Iran. They're like a satellite. They're like a satellite government of Iran. It's the same thing. Intersectionality. Let's talk about that. And then the third point is, is how propaganda and PR is created in the news. And you look at how, on a positive side, when I worked for the American Refugee Committee, how we used it to help people who were dying, fleeing Islamic radicalism. Oh, and this is the last story. I'll tell you this last story and I'm gone, right? Last story and I'm gone. So I was actually going to go to Somalia. I was going to go to Somalia, and I was going to go to Dadaab, Kenya, when I worked for the American Refugee Committee. And so I went. I had to go and get shots, the whole thing, visa, all this type of stuff. And so, literally 2 days before we were going to leave, you know what happened? There was a graduation in Somalia of, I think it was like 150, maybe 200, maybe less, maybe more. I don't know. But it was all these kids who went over to the UK and went and became doctors, like physicians, like real doctors. And they were coming back to Somalia under this kind of program. They had a nonprofit that was going to be paying all these salaries or whatever for these people. They're going to come back to Somalia to help the medical and the healthcare condition in Somalia. So what happened? Literally 2 days before I was going to fly in there, what happened was, true story. You could Google it. You could look it up. What happened was the terrorist organization El Shabazz, right? Because that's a terrorist organization in Somalia. What they did was they put bombs. So there was a big graduation party for these doctors that were coming home. Their families were there. They were there, pressed the whole thing. El Shabazz put bombs underneath the hotel and literally blew the hotel up, killing most of the people that were there, right? A high majority of them. I don't even know how many people it was, but they killed them. And then so there, they told us it was a security risk for us to go over to Somalia, so I never went. But the point is saying, why did they kill all these doctors? They're coming to help, right? They killed them because they were bringing, in their words, Western ideas to Somalia. So the whole Muslim world that you see right now is under control of Islamic radicalism. It's a small percentage that has guns, that has funding, and they're organized, and they're literally putting barrels to people's faces and heads and saying, if you disagree with us, we're going to blow your brains out. That's reality. That's the same thing that you see happening over here in Israel with the Hamas and the Palestinians. If the Palestinians do not agree with Hamas, they will be murdered. Period. If the Palestinians get out of line, they will be murdered. Okay? That's reality. You're seeing stories on the news that are being created by marketing people going into news agencies, giving money and saying, hey, run this story in this way and we'll pay you this amount of money. They're using the plight of the Palestinian people to build a billion-dollar organization. They don't care about human life. Okay? Anyways, so we'll be in touch. But this is a real conversation, and people's lives are on the line. And maybe you have friends that may want to hear it. You could share it if you want. But the point is just saying that the goal of a Torah is to bring all of humanity together and to uplift everybody. That's the only point of that's the only point of the Torah. The whole basis of all the teachings in the Torah is to get a human being and a community to a place where they love thy neighbor as they love thyself. Meaning saying that I have to love myself and loving my neighbor at the same level. All the best.